Well, that'd be great, Maria. Thanks.
No bothers. So just to say to Brendan that there's very exciting things happening in Kerry Writers Museum. They're trying to put a thumbprint on the COVID history, a little bit like the Duchess project, so offer your poem, I'm sure they'd love it. And this story is about a man called Crahur who lived in Castletown, Kinna in West Cork. He had fine, wide fields to play on and a little copse of trees where the animals were so friendly that they'd come right up and look deep into your soul to make friends with you. And he loved it there. But when he was about 6 years of age, his parents got jobs up in the big smoke in Cork, and they grabbed Crahor by the collar, or so it seemed to him, and dragged him, kicking and screaming away from his big, wide, well, West Cork fields up to the big smoke. The first thing they did was they changed his name. Crahor. Crahor. Who'd be calling a child that name? It was said in the school. We'll rename him. Your name is Connor now, boy. Connor. He didn't like it, but he gave into it. Sure, there was no joy at all in fighting the big ones. You'd never win anyway. And then the years passed, and a weight came on his spirit and kind of held him down. And things happened in the world, and it was the year 2020, and COVID bit on the shoulder of the world, and Ireland did not escape, and nor did Cork. They had 2 lockdowns, and in between them there was a little respite. And during the respite, Crahor was walking down through the Colquay when, sitting on the windowsill of Dervish, he saw an old woman with a twisty face, a wrinkled face that had lived long, and her eyes were kind of half closed. But when she saw Crahor, her eyes sprang open. I'm Fiadh Bán, she said. I'm Fiadh Bán, looking right at him. He couldn't help it. He walked up to her, and she put out her little hands, and you weren't really allowed to make physical contact with anybody, but he couldn't stop himself. He put his hand out to her, and she kind of squashed the little bit in his left hand, and he felt comforted and a little bit uplifted by this little transgression. And he said, I'm not Fiadh Bán, I'm Crahor. And he surprised himself by using his old name with her. And she looked at him and she said, Fiadh Bán, Fiadh Bán. And he liked that she held on to her conviction. And off he went across the bridge and up the rock steps, smiling at the meeting with this strange woman. Sure, he hadn't had words with anybody in a long time. And he went into his little cottage and he felt the urge to make soda bread. And he took down the ingredients and his mother's big old brown bowl, because you need a wide bowl to make soda bread. And he threw in the ingredients and he mixed it with his hand and he made the bread, and the smell filled his room. And he cut the bread while it was still fresh and he slathered it in generous amounts with the blackberry jam. He'd collected the smearadova himself earlier in the year. And as he ate it, he smiled. And he realised he hadn't smiled in a long time. And then he went to bed, and it was Samhain Eve in the year 2020, when the big blue moon was looming over the River Lee. But he could get no sleep. More agitated he became as the light poured in the window as if it was daylight. Eventually, he got up and pulled on his shoes and his coat over his pyjamas, and he went down the rock steps towards the River Lee, crossed the River Lee, and there was no one out. Not a car on the road, not a creature stirring, for lockdown had taken hold again. and he turned right down the Western Road, and he sauntered on, liking the luxury of having no one around in the beating heart of the city. And it was like the River Lee called him. And he found himself down the fields there, and a big old tree just in front of the river drew his eye as the mist came out and began to make shapes around that tree. And he saw the Fiadh Bán taking shape, the white deer. And she began to call to his heart. There was no spoken words, but he heard them as clear as a bell. Crohor mo cushla, crohor taran seo, crohor mo cushla, mo vornin taran seo, crohor. And he started to move towards her. He couldn't take his eyes off her dark eyes. And as he moved towards her, the mist played around the edges of her, changing her shape as she left the form of an Fiadh Bán and became a beautiful young woman in a long white dress. And all the time, her heart called to his, Crohor mo cushla, crohor mo fornin, crohor mo gra, taran seo, crohor, you are the pulse in my very heart. Crohor, my darling, crohor, my love, come here, come to me, crohor. And he went. And she put out her hand, and without him having to open his mouth, he told her about the broken world that is Cork City. He told her about the heavy-hearted people. He told her about the people that didn't smile, that even when they wore their masks, they looked down and not into one another's eyes. And she said, Crohor, would you like to come with me to the land of mists, to the lands of Tir na Nog, to wait until beauty and happiness and innocence kisses the shoulder of Éire once more? And in answer, he took her hand and he stepped into the mist. Thank you for giving me the time to tell a second story. I feel I'm rich.
Oh, Maria, that was lovely. We're the rich ones. Do you have all those words in your head before you start reading?
I sit at sessions and these stories just play out on my inner projector, and then I tell them. So yeah, so that one actually I always know where the story came. And I was sitting at a story in Cyber Ipswich with people that I love dearly, and the story just came, and I told it as it came, and I've been telling it since, and I kind of love it myself, so
It shows.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you again.